homeless man was sitting at the dining table of $1 million mansion. The silverware was set, the food was hot, and the man at the head of the table wanted him gone. But when the old man lifted his hand, the light caught something it shouldn't have, a single detail so impossible, it made the rich man freeze. His anger didn't fade, it shattered. Because in that split second, he realized this wasn't just a stranger at his table. This was a secret big enough to destroy the life he'd spent decades building. The silence in the dining room of the pristine colonial mansion in the suburbs of Boston was usually measured by the ticking of the grandfather clock. Tonight, however, it was measured by the thrumming, vibrating tension radiating off David Holloway. David was a man who lived his life by a very specific set of metrics. At 45, he was the youngest senior partner at Sterling and Holt, a venture capital firm that managed billions. He wore bespoke suits. He drove a German car. His hedges were trimmed to the millimeter. He had spent 20 years building a fortress of perfection to hide the fact that he came from absolutely nothing. He stared at the roast chicken sitting in the center of the mahogany table. Then he lifted his eyes to the intruder sitting across from him. "Pass the potatoes, please," the stranger said. His voice was like gravel in a blender. His hands, reaching for the crystal serving bowl, were stained with the kind of permanent grime that sinks into the cuticles and never washes out. He wore a coat that was more holes than wool, and the smell, a pungent mix of wood smoke, old rain, and unwashed skin, was currently warring with the aroma of the rosemary chicken. David gripped his silverware so hard his knuckles turned white. "Toby," David said, his voice terrifyingly calm. "Would you like to explain to me, one more time, why there is a vagrant eating off your mother's wedding china?" Next to the homeless man sat Toby, David's 11-year-old son. Toby had his mother's soft eyes and a heart that David constantly worried was too big for this sharp-edged world. "It's Thanksgiving week, Dad," Toby said, shrinking slightly into his chair but holding his ground. "You said we should be grateful for what we have. You said we should help people. I found Elias outside the library." He was freezing. "The shelter is 3 miles away, Toby," David snapped. "They have soup. They have beds. We have a security system for a reason." "The shelter is full," Elias said softly. He didn't look up from his plate. He was eating with a slow, deliberate dignity that annoyed David even more than the smell. "And the cold tonight. It bites the bone." David looked at the man. Elias looked to be in his 60s, though the street aged people in dog years. His beard was a matted gray thicket, hiding most of his face. His hair was long and greasy, but his eyes, piercing, intelligent blue eyes, seemed oddly out of place in the ruin of his face. "I appreciate the charity, Toby," David said, putting his fork down. "But this isn't how the world works. You don't just invite strangers into your home. It's dangerous. It's irresponsible." "He's hungry, David," his wife Sarah said gently from the other end of the table. She looked tense, caught between her husband's rigid standards and her son's kindness. "Let the man eat. We have plenty." David exhaled through his nose, a sharp hiss of air. He checked his watch, a Rolex Submariner that cost more than most people's cars. "Fine, you eat. Then you leave. Immediately." The dinner was an exercise in torture. The clinking of silverware sounded like gunshots. Toby tried to make conversation, asking Elias about his life. "I used to travel a lot," Elias murmured. Taking a sip of water, he held the Baccarat crystal glass by the stem, surprisingly delicate. "I've seen the sunrise over the Swiss Alps. I've seen the markets in Hong Kong." David let out a dark, mocking chuckle. "The Alps, huh? Let me guess. You were a secret agent? A millionaire playboy?" Elias looked up, meeting David's gaze. There was no anger in the old man's eyes, just a deep, weary sadness. "No, just a man who worked hard, loved his family, and lost his way." "We all work hard," David retorted, his patience snapping. "Some of us just have the discipline to keep what we earn. Some of us don't drink it away, or gamble it away." "David," Sarah whispered, horrified. "What?" David stood up, throwing his napkin on the table. "I'm supposed to sit here and pretend this is normal? I worked 80-hour weeks to get us into this neighborhood, Sarah, to get away from the trash. And now my son is dragging it through the front door." He looked at Elias. "You're done. Get out." Elias stopped chewing. He slowly lowered his fork. He wiped his mouth with the linen napkin, folding it neatly next to his plate. I didn't mean to cause a disturbance, Elias said quietly. Toby, thank you. You have a good soul. Don't let the world take that from you. He's not leaving, Toby shouted, tears springing to his eyes. It's snowing. I don't care if it's hailing fire, David roared. The stress of the last month, the failing merger at work, the plummeting stock price of his firm, the pressure to maintain the facade of success finally erupted. He directed it all at the convenient target in the dirty coat. I want him out of my house. Now! David marched around the table. He grabbed Elias by the arm of his filthy coat. Dad, stop! Toby cried. Get up, David hissed, yanking the older man. Elias didn't fight. He stood up, unsteady on his feet. He was frailer than he looked under the layers of rags. I'm going. No need for force. There's every need. David spat. He shoved Elias toward the foyer. The smell of the man was overwhelming now, triggering memories David had buried deep. Memories of a childhood spent in a trailer park, of a father who smelled just like this before he ran off. David hated poverty because he feared it. He feared sliding back into it. They reached the heavy oak front door. David wrenched it open. The wind howled outside, driving snow onto the polished hardwood floor. Go back to the gutter, David sneered, and stay away from my son. Elias turned to look at David one last time. He reached out a hand, perhaps to steady himself against the doorframe, or perhaps to offer a final gesture of peace. Merry Christmas, David, Elias whispered. As he raised his hand, the oversized frayed sleeve of his coat slid down his forearm. The porch light, a bright, unforgiving LED, caught the object on the man's wrist. It wasn't a piece of string. It wasn't a cheap digital watch from a dumpster. It was gold. Rose gold. David froze, his eyes locked onto the wrist. It was a watch, but not just any watch. It was a Patek Philippe, a vintage chronograph. The leather strap was worn and cracked, but the case was unmistakable. David knew watches. He collected them. It was the one hobby he allowed himself to signal his status, and he knew what he was looking at. It was a Patek Philippe reference 1518. The first perpetual calendar chronograph ever made in series. There were only 281 of them ever made. They were worth millions. But it wasn't the value that made the blood drain from David's face. It wasn't the impossibility of a homeless man wearing the holy grail of horology. It was the crack. There was a distinct, jagged spiderweb crack on the crystal face, right over the moon phase indicator at the 6 o'clock position. David's breath hitched. The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The sound of the wind faded into a high-pitched ringing in his ears. He knew that crack. He had made that crack. The memory hit him with the force of a physical blow. Chicago, 1992. David was 21, an intern at a small but aggressive investment firm called Vanguard. He was hungry, ambitious, and broke. He was the first in his family to go to college, scraping by on scholarships and sheer will. The CEO of Vanguard was a legend named Arthur Sterling. Sterling was a titan, a man who had built empires, lost them, and built them again. He was tough, brilliant, and surprisingly kind to the young intern who stayed late every night. One night, after a massive IPO launch, there was a party in the office. Champagne was flowing. David was running files to Sterling's office. Sterling was there, loosening his tie, a glass of scotch in his hand. He had taken off his watch, that rose gold Patek Philippe, and set it on the edge of his desk. David, Sterling had smiled. Good work on the analysis. You've got a future here. Thank you, sir, David had stammered. In his nervousness, David had turned too quickly. His hip bumped the desk. The watch slid. It fell. It hit the marble floor face down with a sickening crack. David remembered the terror. That watch was worth more than David's life. He picked it up, shaking. The crystal was shattered over the moon phase. He waited to be fired. He waited to be sued. Instead, Arthur Sterling had laughed. He took the watch, looked at the crack, and put it back on his wrist. It's just glass, kid, Sterling had said. Time keeps moving, broken glass or not. It's a reminder. Imperfection is part of the character. Never trust a man with no scars, David. And never trust a watch that hasn't taken a hit. Sterling never fixed it. He wore it to every board meeting. He called it his lucky break. 3 years later, Arthur Sterling's life fell apart. His wife and daughter were killed in a private plane crash. Sterling broke. He liquidated his assets, resigned from the board, and vanished. He walked away from a billion-dollar fortune. Rumors swirled for decades. Some said he moved to an island. Some said he entered a monastery. Most assumed he was dead. David had risen through the ranks of the vacuum Sterling left behind. He modeled his career on Sterling. He quoted him, but he had never seen him again, until now.
Wait!
David choked out. Elias, Arthur, was already stepping into the snow. The door was half closed. David lunged forward, grabbing the door before it latched. He ran out onto the porch in his socks, the snow soaking instantly into the expensive fabric. "Stop!" David yelled. The homeless man stopped at the bottom of the steps. He turned slowly, snow gathering on his matted shoulders. "Where did you get that watch?" David demanded, his voice trembling. Elias looked down at his wrist, covering it instinctively with his other hand. "It's not stolen," he rasped. "I've had it a long time." "I know you didn't steal it," David said, stepping down into the snow. The cold was shocking, but he didn't feel it. He walked up to the man. He was close enough to smell him again, but this time, the smell didn't register as disgust. It registered as tragedy. David reached out and gently took the man's wrist. He pulled the sleeve back. There it was. The reference, 1518. The jagged crack over the moon. David looked up into the deep, sorrowful blue eyes. He looked past the dirt, past the beard, past the 20 years of suffering. He looked for the spark of the titan who had taught him how to read a balance sheet. "Mr. Sterling?" David whispered. The man flinched. The name seemed to physically hurt him, like a slap. He pulled his arm back. "That man is dead," Elias said. His voice broke. "He died in a cornfield in Iowa with his family." You walked away," David said, his mind reeling. "Everyone thought you were dead. The company, I run the division now. Your division." "Vanguard," Elias murmured. A flicker of recognition crossed his face. You're the intern, the clumsy one." A laugh bubbled up in David's throat, hysterical and wet. "Yes, I'm the clumsy one. David Holloway." Elias looked at him, really looked at him for the first time. He looked at the house, the car in the driveway, the suit David was wearing. "You did well, David," Elias said softly. "You built the fortress." David faltered. He looked at this man, this ghost who had been his idol, this man who had told him that scars were character, while David had spent his life trying to polish his own scars away. "Why?" David asked. "Why this? You could have lived in luxury. You could have—" "Luxury?" Elias shook his head. "After they died, the silence in the mansion was too loud, David. The money felt like lead. I couldn't breathe. I just started walking, and I kept walking. I found that when you have nothing to lose. The grief is easier to carry when you aren't carrying anything else." "But you kept the watch," David said. Elias touched the cracked face. "It was a gift from my wife, and it reminded me of the day I learned that things can break and still work. It reminded me of the kid who was so scared to fail." He looked at David. "But I see I made a mistake coming inside. You've become hard, David. You fixed the glass, but you broke the machine." The words cut David deeper than the cold wind. "You fixed the glass, but you broke the machine." David thought about the dinner, the way he had treated Toby, the way he treated Sarah, the way he measured his self-worth by his stock portfolio while ignoring the rot in his own soul. He was so terrified of being poor that he had become emotionally bankrupt. He looked at Arthur Sterling, a man with nothing, who had treated Toby with more kindness in an hour than David had in a month. Toby was standing in the doorway now, watching, shivering in his sweater. David made a decision. It was the riskiest trade of his life. "No," David said firmly. "You're not leaving." "David, I belong out here," Elias said. "No, you don't, and I don't belong in there. Not the way I am now." David grabbed Elias's arm, not with force, but with a desperate grip. "You told me once that you never trust a man with no scars. Well, I'm scarred, Arthur. I'm terrified. I'm losing my family because I'm so scared of losing my money. I need you to come back inside." "I can't be Arthur Sterling," the old man said. "Then be Elias," David said. "Just be Elias. My son invited you to dinner. And my son has better instincts than I do. Please." David's voice cracked. He wasn't the CEO asking. He was the intern looking for guidance. "Please, don't make me the man who kicked Arthur Sterling into the snow." Elias studied David's face. He saw the panic, the regret, the genuine plea. Slowly, the old man nodded. "It is cold," Elias admitted. David put his arm around the man's filthy shoulders. He didn't care about the suit. He didn't care about the neighbors. "Come inside," David said. "We haven't had dessert." They walked back up the steps. Toby moved aside, his eyes wide. "Dad?" Toby asked. "Who is he?" David stopped in the foyer. The heat of the house wrapped around them. He looked at his son, then at the homeless man who had once ruled Wall Street. "Toby," David said, his voice thick with emotion. "This is an old friend. He taught me everything I know about business, but I think he has a few things left to teach me about life." The dinner did not end early. David went into his cellar and brought up a bottle of 1982 Bordeaux, a bottle he had been saving for a special occasion. He poured it into a glass for Elias. Elias showered in the guest suite. David gave him a set of clean clothes, sweats, and a cashmere sweater. When Elias returned to the table, scrubbed clean, beard trimmed with Sarah's scissors, he looked different. The Titan was still hiding in there, buried deep, but visible. They didn't talk about the stock market. They didn't talk about venture capital. They talked about Toby's school. They talked about the stars Elias had seen in the Arizona desert. They talked about the Mets. And as the night wound down, Elias unbuckled the watch from his wrist. He slid it across the mahogany table toward David. "Here," Elias said. David recoiled. "I can't take that. It's the 1518. It's priceless." "It's a watch, David," Elias said gently. "It tells time, and my time with it is done. It's heavy. I don't want to carry it anymore." He tapped the cracked crystal. "You keep it. Put it on your wrist, and every time you look at it, every time you see that crack, you remember tonight. You remember that people are more important than perfection. You remember that you can break, and you can still keep ticking." David picked up the watch. It was warm from Elias's skin. He fastened it onto his wrist, right next to his immaculate cufflink. It looked out of place. It looked battered. It looked beautiful. "Thank you," David whispered. The viral post happened 3 days later, not by David, but by a neighbor who had seen the commotion on the porch. The story of the homeless billionaire hit the news cycle like a bomb. The media wanted a piece of Arthur Sterling. They wanted the comeback story. They wanted the movie rights, but Arthur declined them all. He didn't return to the board. He didn't reclaim his fortune. The legal hurdles would have been immense, and he had no interest in them. Instead, he stayed in the guest house on the Holloway property. He became the grandfather Toby never had. He spent his days gardening, fixing the things in the house that David used to just pay people to replace. David changed. It didn't happen overnight. He was still intense. He was still driven, but the fear was gone. He stopped checking the stock price every 10 minutes. He started leaving work at 5 p.m. to throw a baseball with Toby. And in the boardroom of Sterling and Holt, whenever a junior partner proposed a deal that was ruthless or unethical, David Holloway would look down at his wrist. He would rub his thumb over the jagged crack in the crystal of the rose gold Patek Philippe. He would remember the snow. He would remember the smell of wood smoke and ruin. And he would remember that the man who saved him twice, once as an intern and once as a father, was the man everyone else had walked right past. "No," David would say, smiling a smile that had scars in it. "We're going to do the right thing, even if it costs us." Because David finally understood the value of things. And he knew, with absolute certainty, that the most expensive thing in the room wasn't the watch. It was the time.